Welcome to the Sci-Fi Codes channel. Have fun listening to this story. Don't forget to subscribe with the subscribe button. Chapter 1. The Zorian Nebula Bar. The Zorian Nebula Bar wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find a human. Nestled on the fringes of known space, it was a dingy, dimly lit establishment where the drinks could dissolve your insides, and the patrons looked like they'd stepped out of a nightmare fueled by bad decisions and worse substances. Yet, there I was, nursing a glass of something that glowed an unhealthy shade of purple and tasted like a mix of rocket fuel and regret. I wasn't there by choice. My ship had broken down in this godforsaken sector, and I was killing time while waiting for repairs. That's when I spotted him, or rather, it, a Zorx. Known as one of the most feared species in the galaxy, Zorx assassins had a deadly reputation, and even deadlier fashion sense. This particular Zorx, however, looked like it had seen better days. Its iridescent scales, which should have shimmered with otherworldly beauty, were dull and lifeless, and all four of its eyes darted nervously around the bar, as if expecting danger from every shadowy corner. Intrigued and perhaps a bit reckless due to the effects of my radioactive beverage, I decided to strike up a conversation. "Rough day?" I called out, raising my glass in a mock toast. The Zorx's head swiveled towards me, all four eyes blinking rapidly. It hesitated for a moment before slithering over to my table, its movements a strange mix of grace and paranoia. "You have no idea, human," it hissed, its voice like a cat being dragged across a chalkboard while gargling gravel. I winced at the sound but pressed on. "Try me. I've seen some pretty weird stuff in my travels." The Zork seemed to deflate, its scales drooping further. "I doubt you've encountered anything like this. I failed a mission." Now, I'm no expert on alien facial expressions, but I could swear this Zorx looked embarrassed. "Failed a mission?" I echoed, trying to keep the amusement out of my voice. "What kind of mission?" It leaned in close, its breath a nauseating mix of rotten eggs and mint, an odor that shouldn't exist in nature but somehow served as an air freshener in the bar's putrid atmosphere. "I am, or was, the most feared assassin in the Zorian Empire. My name whispered in terrified awe across 1,000 worlds is Exlar the Annihilator." I couldn't help it. I snorted, nearly choking on my drink. "Exlar the Annihilator? Seriously? Did you come up with that name yourself, or did your mom help you?" Exlar bristled, his scales briefly flaring with indignation before settling back into their dejected state. "Mock me if you will, human, but I assure you my reputation is well earned. Or, at least it was." Okay, I said, holding up my hands in a placating gesture. "So what happened? Did you miss your target, weapon malfunction, stub your toe on the way to the assassination?" The alien assassin fixed me with a glare that might have been intimidating if its eyes weren't arranged in a way that made it look perpetually confused. "Worse," it growled. "I encountered a human." I blinked, sure I had misheard. "I'm sorry, what? You're telling me that you, the most feared assassin in the galaxy, couldn't take out one measly human target?" Exlar's scales rippled in what I assumed was the Zorian equivalent of a shudder. "You don't understand," it hissed. "Humans are different." I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing, nearly spitting out my drink in the process. Several nearby aliens turned to stare, their appendages twitching nervously at the sound of human laughter, a noise apparently rare and unsettling in this part of the galaxy. "Different?" I wheezed, wiping tears from my eyes. "We're basically hairless apes with delusions of grandeur. What could possibly be so scary about us?" Exlar leaned in even closer, its voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to sound both terrified and awestruck. "Let me tell you about my first and last encounter with a human target. Perhaps then you'll understand the true horror that is your species. And so, dear reader, gather around as I recount the tale of how humanity's sheer absurdity managed to terrify the galaxy's deadliest assassin. Buckle up, because this story is wilder than a roller coaster designed by a drunk engineer with a vendetta against the laws of physics. Chapter 2. A mission unlike any other. It all started on a Tuesday, or maybe it was a Thursday. Do Earth days even matter in the vastness of space? Time is just a construct anyway, especially when you're an interstellar assassin with a penchant for dramatic entrances and even more dramatic exits. Exlar had just received his latest contract, delivered via the standard encrypted quantum-entangled neural implant that all respectable assassins use these days. As he decrypted the message, his 4 hearts, because why settle for just one when you can have a backup system, began to race with anticipation. The target, a human named Dave Johnson. Now Exlar had heard rumors about humans. They were supposedly a new upstart species that had somehow managed to bumble their way into the galactic community. Most aliens viewed them as a curiosity at best, a nuisance at worst. There were whispered stories in the darkest corners of space stations about human unpredictability, their bizarre customs, and their inexplicable ability to survive things that should, by all rights, kill them instantly. But Exlar wasn't worried. After all, he had taken down Grixlonian warlords with skin made of living metal, outsmarted quantum computers that could calculate the heat death of the universe to the nanosecond, and even managed to assassinate a gaseous entity that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. How hard could one measly human be, with the confidence that came from being the galaxy's premier assassin and having a name that sounded like someone had sneezed while trying to pronounce Excalibur? Exlar began his usual pre-assassination routine. First, he sharpened his retractable claws, honing them to a molecular edge that could slice through battleship armor like warm butter. Then, he polished his scales to a mirror sheen because if you're going to kill someone, you might as well look fabulous doing it. Vanity, after all, was the 8th deadly sin in Zorian culture, right after improper tentacle grooming and just before failure to color coordinate bioluminescent patterns. Next came the ritual of menacing glare practice. Exlar spent a full hour in front of his hollow mirror perfecting the arch of his eye stalks and the sinister narrowing of his pupils. He practiced lines like, "Your time has come, puny mortal," and "Prepare to meet your doom, insignificant life form," rolling them around in his mouth like fine wine, or, in his case, like the corrosive acid Zorians used as mouthwash. Finally, he packed his assassin's toolkit: nanomolecular blade, check; quantum disruptor pistol, check; vial of ultra-toxic nope venom, so named because one drop made you say nope right before your nervous system decided to nope out of existence, check; selfie stick for post-assassination victory photos, double check. Satisfied with his preparation, Exlar boarded his sleek black spaceship. The vessel was a top-of-the-line model, custom designed for stealth and speed. Its hull was coated with light-absorbing nanoparticles, making it darker than the space between stars. It was so stealthy, in fact, that Exlar occasionally lost it in parking lots, leading to some rather embarrassing moments of him clicking his key fob and listening for the telltale beep-beep of the ship's locking mechanism. As his ship entered Earth's atmosphere, Exlar couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement mixed with a dash of apprehension. This was his first time on the human homeworld, and he was curious to see what all the fuss was about. His ship's cloaking device engaged, rendering it invisible to Earth's primitive detection systems, which, according to his intel, consisted mainly of old men squinting at radar screens and occasionally mistaking flocks of geese for incoming missiles. He landed in a place called Nebraska, which his research told him was the most boring place on the planet, perfect for a discreet assassination. As Exlar emerged from his ship, his adaptive camouflage kicked in, transforming his appearance to blend in with the local populace. He checked his reflection in a nearby window and saw a nondescript man with brown hair and unremarkable features staring back at him. Exlar preened for a moment, admiring how the camouflage had even given him a slight paunch and a receding hairline for added authenticity. "Eat your heart out, Daniel Craig," he muttered, adjusting his ill-fitting polo shirt. With his disguise in place, Exlar set off to find his target. According to his intel, Dave Johnson worked at a place called the DMV. Exlar wasn't sure what that stood for, but he assumed it must be some kind of high-security government facility. Why else would someone put a hit out on an employee there? Perhaps it stood for Department of Mass Vaporization or Doomsday Machine Vault. As he approached the building, Exlar was confused. Where were the armed guards, the laser turrets, the moat filled with ravenous space piranhas? This DMV looked like any other mundane Earth structure, sandwiched between a nail salon and a pizza place that proudly advertised its 2-for-1 anchovy special on a neon sign that buzzed ominously. Exlar entered the DMV and immediately wished he hadn't. The place was packed with humans, all of whom looked like they were experiencing varying levels of existential despair. Some were slumped in plastic chairs, staring vacantly at flickering screens that displayed meaningless strings of numbers and letters. Others were trapped in long lines that seemed to stretch into infinity, shuffling forward at a pace that could only be described as glacial. A faint odor of stale coffee and broken dreams hung in the air, and the fluorescent lighting flickered intermittently, casting everyone in a sickly greenish hue. "Excuse me," Exlar said, tapping the shoulder of a particularly bedraggled woman who was clutching a stack of papers and muttering darkly under her breath. "I'm looking for Dave Johnson." The woman turned, her eyes filled with the kind of weary resignation that comes from spending too many hours in the DMV. "Join the club, pal," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "We're all looking for Dave Johnson. He's on break. Again." Exlar blinked, all four eyes cycling through various expressions of confusion. "Break? What kind of assassin target goes on break?" "That kind," the woman said, jabbing a thumb toward a back room from which the faint strains of elevator music could be heard. "He'll be back in 15 minutes, or an hour, or never. Hard to say." Exlar's grip tightened on his disruptor pistol as he made his way to the back room. This was not going according to plan. He had envisioned a quick, clean kill, not whatever this was. As he approached the door, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. Laughter, human laughter. Exlar burst through the door, disruptor at the ready, only to find Dave Johnson sitting at a table, surrounded by co-workers, all of whom were engrossed in a game of cards. Dave looked up, still chuckling at some joke one of his friends had made, and met Exlar's gaze. For a moment, they just stared at each other, Exlar's eyes flicking between his target and the disruptor in his hand, which suddenly felt very heavy. "Hey, buddy," Dave said, his voice friendly and devoid of fear. "You here to join the game? We're playing Go Fish." Exlar blinked. This was his target. This pudgy, middle-aged human in a cheap suit with a mustard stain on his tie. This was the man who was supposed to be a threat to the galaxy. Dave's easygoing demeanor and the sheer absurdity of the situation threw Exlar off his game. For the first time in his career, he hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, something happened that Exlar would later describe as the most mind-bendingly terrifying thing he had ever witnessed. Dave looked him in the eyes, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Hey, you want a slice of pizza? Got an extra anchovy special." It wasn't the offer of pizza that scared Exlar. No, it was something deeper, something he couldn't quite put into words. It was the way Dave seemed completely unbothered by the presence of a galactic assassin. It was the way he offered hospitality and camaraderie in the face of potential death. It was human. Exlar realized in that moment that he was in way over his head. Humans didn't fear death the way other species did. They didn't react predictably, didn't follow the script. They were chaotic, illogical, and worst of all, incredibly difficult to kill when they didn't take you seriously. With a hasty nod and a muttered excuse about needing to make a call, Exlar backed out of the room and fled the DMV, abandoning his mission and his dignity. He returned to his ship, set a course for the farthest corner of the galaxy, and vowed never to take another contract involving humans again. Back in the Zorian Nebula bar, I sat across from Exlar, struggling to keep a straight face as he finished his story. The mighty assassin had been bested not by weapons or cunning, but by a middle-aged man with an easy smile and a fondness for anchovies. It was a tale so bizarre, so quintessentially human, that I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride for my species. "Sounds like you had a close call," I said, raising my glass in a toast to Exlar's misadventure. "Guess humans really are different, huh?" Exlar nodded, his scales shimmering faintly as he downed his drink in one gulp. "Different," he agreed, his voice tinged with a newfound respect, and utterly, utterly terrifying. As the Zorian Nebula bar continued to buzz with the chatter of 1,000 alien voices, I leaned back in my chair, savoring the knowledge that somewhere out there in the vastness of space, humanity's greatest weapon was our unpredictable, indefinable, utterly confounding nature. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep us safe in a galaxy full of unknown dangers. Chapter 3. The Gnarwhool Ambush. The Zorian Nebula bar was buzzing with the usual chaos of interstellar riffraff, and Exlar was on his third drink, something that looked like a smoothie but smelled like burning tires, when an alarm blared from the far corner of the bar. The sound cut through the chatter, causing every head, tentacle, and eye stalk in the room to swivel towards the noise. "Attention, patrons," A metallic voice echoed through the dingy bar. "Due to an emergency landing by the Gnarwhool bounty hunters, all exits are currently sealed. Please remain calm and continue with your beverages." Exlar's 4 eyes widened in panic. "Gnarwhool bounty hunters? Here?" he hissed, his voice spiking with fear. I glanced at him, bemused by the sudden shift in his demeanor. "Gnarwhool bounty hunters?" I echoed, trying to make sense of the bizarre name. "They're not just any bounty hunters, human," Exlar said, his voice barely a whisper. "They're like the Zorks, but worse. Ruthless, relentless, and absolutely despise us for existing. They don't take contracts, they create them. If they're here, it's because they're hunting someone, and that someone is probably breathing their last few moments of free oxygen." As if on cue, the doors to the bar slammed open, and in slithered the Gnarwhools, a trio of massive slug-like creatures, each standing over 7 feet tall, with tough, iridescent skins and sharp, jagged teeth. Their eye stalks bobbed above their heads, scanning the room with cold, calculating precision. They moved with a slow, purposeful glide, their bulk leaving a slimy trail on the bar's grimy floor. The patrons parted like a wave, none willing to challenge their intrusion. "They're here for me," Exlar muttered, his scales pulsing with a faint, nervous light. "Seriously?" I asked, my eyes darting between the Gnarwhools and Exlar, who was shrinking into his seat. "You're a galactic assassin who's afraid of glorified garden pests? They're not pests, human. They're persistent." I glanced at the Gnarwhools again. Their leader, a particularly large specimen with scars crisscrossing its otherwise smooth skin, had raised a hollow projector, casting a flickering image of Exlar across the bar's smoke-filled air. "Attention, patrons," the Gnarwhool leader boomed in a voice like gravel grinding in a blender. "We are seeking Exlar the Annihilator. Surrender him now and the rest of you will leave unscathed." Exlar let out a groan and buried his face in his hands. "I knew I shouldn't have come here," he muttered. "I knew I should have gone to the Plutonian Sporehouse instead. Do you have a plan?" I asked, half expecting Exlar to whip out some assassin trick that would turn the tables on the Gnarwhools. Instead, he looked at me with a defeated expression that said he had already accepted his fate. "There's only one way out of this," Exlar said, his voice a resigned whisper. "You have to pretend to be me." "What?" I yelped, my voice a bit too loud, drawing a few curious glances from nearby aliens. "No way, I'm not suicidal." "Just listen," Exlar urged, his scales quivering. "You humans are unpredictable, remember? Just act like you're crazy enough to be a Zork's assassin. They won't know what to make of it." "This is insane," I muttered. But as the Gnarwhools moved closer, I realized that insanity might actually be my best shot at surviving this. With a deep breath, I stood up, puffed out my chest, and put on my best galactic assassin face, which, judging by the reflections in the many alien eyes around me, was more like a person who had just stepped on a Lego barefoot. "I am Exlar the Annihilator," I bellowed, stepping forward with as much confidence as I could muster. "What do you want, slime balls?" The Gnarwhools stopped, their eye stalks swiveling to fix on me. For a moment, the entire bar went silent, everyone holding their breath. Then, the leader of the Gnarwhools hissed, his eye stalks narrowing. "You? You don't look like a Zorks," it growled, sliding closer, its mouth dripping with viscous saliva. "Yeah? Well, maybe I'm tired of looking like a Zorks," I shot back, my heart racing. "I've had a makeover, and I got tired of your dumb, predictable Gnarwhool faces." The Gnarwhools exchanged confused glances, clearly not used to this level of defiance from their quarry. Their leader seemed to hesitate, its eye stalks retracting slightly. "Is this some sort of human trickery?" it hissed, uncertainty creeping into its gravelly voice. "It's called unpredictability," I said with a smug grin. "I wouldn't understand. Now why don't you crawl back to whatever sewer you slithered out of before I decide to decorate this bar with Gnarwhool slime?" For a moment, I thought it might actually work. The Gnarwhools seemed genuinely baffled, their eye stalks twitching as they tried to process this new, bizarre development. But just as I was starting to believe my own bravado, the leader snarled and raised a weapon that looked disturbingly like a high-tech garden trowel. "Enough!" it bellowed. "We don't have time for this. Exlar, or we start vaporizing everything in sight." Before I could react, Exlar suddenly leapt to his feet, throwing something small and metallic into the air. There was a blinding flash, followed by a deafening bang, and the bar erupted into chaos. Patrons screamed, tables overturned, and in the confusion, Exlar grabbed my arm and yanked me towards a back exit. You actually bought me enough time, Exlar gasped as we ducked through a maintenance door. Thanks, human, that was impressive. We sprinted down a dark, narrow corridor, our footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Behind us, the sound of shouting and blaster fire filled the air, but we didn't stop until we reached a small hidden hatch that Exlar pried open with a flick of his claws. This way, he said, gesturing for me to climb through. It leads to the docking bay. We can get out of here. I didn't need to be told twice. I crawled through the hatch, dropping down into the dimly lit bay. Exlar followed, sealing the hatch behind us, just as the Gnarwhool's shouts grew louder. Quickly, Exlar urged, leading me to his ship, a sleek black craft that was already powering up. We dove inside, and within moments, Exlar had us lifting off, the ship's engines roaring to life. As we shot into space, I glanced back at the bar, now just a shrinking speck behind us. That was insane, I said, still catching my breath. Are all your missions like this? Not quite, Exlar said, his tone grudgingly appreciative. But I have to admit, you humans have a certain flair for chaos. I couldn't help but laugh. Well, that's one way to put it. So, what now? Exlar's eyes glinted with something that almost looked like respect. Now, I take you somewhere safe. And maybe, he added, we figure out what's so terrifying about humans that even Gnarwhools hesitate. I leaned back in my seat, still high on adrenaline, and watched as the stars streaked by outside the cockpit. Whatever was coming next, I had a feeling it was going to be one hell of a ride. Before proceeding, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Chapter 4. The Galactic Auction House. We sped through hyperspace, Exlar's ship humming with the smooth efficiency of Zork's engineering. The silence between us was a welcome break from the chaos of the bar, but it didn't last long. Thanks for saving my hide back there, Exlar said, breaking the quiet. His voice was begrudging, like someone forced to thank a pesky neighbor for returning a lost pet. You're not bad in a pinch for a human, I smirked, stretching out in the co-pilot's chair. You're welcome. Just remember that next time you're trash-talking humans. Exlar's scales rippled in what I could only guess was his species' equivalent of a chuckle. Fair enough, but don't think this makes us friends. I'm still a Zork's assassin, and you're still... you. Yeah, I said, waving off his gruffness. So where are we headed? You said something about figuring out what's so terrifying about humans. Exlar tapped a few buttons on his console, bringing up a star map. We're going to the Galactic Auction House. It's a neutral zone, and if anyone has information on why Gnarwhools are hunting Zorks, it's them. The Galactic Auction House? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Isn't that the place where they sell off all sorts of illegal and dangerous stuff? You think they'll just have information lying around? Exlar snorted. The auction house has information on everyone and everything, if you know how to ask. Plus, he added, his eyes flicking towards me with a knowing glint, they've got a reputation for showcasing the most bizarre, exotic, and unpredictable artifacts in the universe. Sound familiar? I rolled my eyes but couldn't help the small thrill of excitement that coursed through me. This place sounded like the galactic version of a pawn shop mixed with a black market, and I was intrigued despite myself. A few hours later, we dropped out of hyperspace, and the Galactic Auction House came into view. It was a massive, sprawling structure that resembled a cross between a space station and an art museum, glowing with 1,000 different neon lights and surrounded by ships of every conceivable design. The place was bustling, with spacecraft docking and departing like bees swarming around a hive. As we approached, Exlar maneuvered his ship into a docking bay, and we disembarked into the throng of aliens, traders, and buyers milling about. The auction house was a sensory overload. Bright lights, blaring announcements in a dozen languages, and the constant hum of commerce. The walls were lined with displays showcasing everything from rare gemstones to ancient weaponry, and even a few live specimens from distant worlds. Exlar led the way, his gait purposeful as we navigated through the crowds. We passed rows of stalls where vendors hawked everything from high-tech gadgets to mysterious artifacts that glowed ominously under ultraviolet lights. So who are we looking for? I asked, trying to keep pace with Exlar's swift strides. The broker, Exlar said simply. He's the one who runs this place. If there's information to be had, he'll know it. We wound our way through the maze of corridors, eventually arriving at a set of ornate doors guarded by 2 towering robots that looked like they could snap a person in half without breaking a sweat. Exlar flashed some kind of pass and the doors slid open, revealing a lavish office filled with priceless art, rare alien plants, and a desk made from what appeared to be a single gigantic gemstone. Behind the desk sat the broker, a humanoid figure with skin that shimmered like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed faintly with an inner light. He was impeccably dressed in a suit that looked like it was spun from the fabric of space itself, stars and galaxies swirling across the material. "Exlar," the broker said, his voice smooth and unflappably calm. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Information," Exlar replied curtly. "I need to know why the Gnarwhools are hunting Zork's assassins." The broker leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Ah, the Gnarwhools, a nasty bunch, and not prone to idle hunts. But why should I part with such valuable information?" Exlar hesitated, his eyes darting to me as if weighing a decision. "We can pay," he said finally, though his tone suggested he wasn't thrilled about it. The broker's lips curled into a sly smile. "I have little interest in credits, Exlar, but I might be persuaded to trade, if you have something of equal value." Exlar scowled, clearly not keen on the idea. But before he could respond, I stepped forward, an idea sparking in my mind. "What if we offer you something truly unique?" I said, catching the broker's attention. "Something from Earth. Ever heard of a fidget spinner?" Exlar looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but the broker's eyes widened with interest. "Ah, yes. The human artifacts of distraction. Quite the curiosity in certain circles." I pulled a small gleaming fidget spinner from my pocket, one I'd kept as a joke, a relic of a simpler pre-space travel time. I set it spinning on the desk, its mesmerizing motion catching the faint light of the broker's office. The broker watched, fascinated. Remarkable, a symbol of human ingenuity and pointless entertainment. He nodded thoughtfully, then snapped his fingers. "Very well. Information for the spinner." Exlar stared at me, incredulous, but I just shrugged. It wasn't like I had much use for a fidget spinner out here anyway. The broker retrieved a data pad and tapped a few keys. "The Gnarwhools are hunting Zorks because someone's put a bounty on your entire order. A significant bounty. Word is the contractor is someone high up, someone who sees the Zorks as a threat to their, shall we say, interests." Exlar's eyes narrowed. "Who?" The broker smirked. "That, my dear assassin, is worth far more than a mere human trinket. But I can tell you this much. Whoever they are, they're hiding in plain sight, within a faction that is very much allied with the Zorks." Exlar gritted his teeth, his mind clearly racing through the implications. The Zorks had allies across the galaxy, but for one of them to turn against their assassins, it was almost unthinkable. "That's all I can give you," the broker said, leaning back with a satisfied smile. "And more than you paid for, I might add." Exlar nodded grudgingly. "Thanks, broker. This helps." As we left the broker's office, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and dread. The Zorks had powerful enemies, and now we were caught in the middle of a web of intrigue far beyond anything I'd bargained for. "So what now?" I asked as we made our way back to the ship. Exlar's expression was grim, but there was a determined glint in his eyes. "Now we find out who wants the Zorks dead, and why they're so afraid of us." "And me?" I asked, half joking. "Am I just along for the ride?" Exlar glanced at me, his gaze assessing. "You're along because I owe you, and because, against all odds, you might just be useful." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Well, if nothing else, at least I've got a story for when I get back to Earth. If I ever get back, that is." Exlar just grunted, starting up the ship's engines. "Don't get your hopes up, human. This galaxy has a way of keeping things interesting." As we blasted off into the void, I settled back into my seat, the thrill of the unknown pulsing in my veins. Wherever this journey led, I had a feeling it was going to be one hell of a ride, and that humanity's unpredictable nature was about to get tested in ways I couldn't even imagine. Chapter 5. A Deal with the Crelari. The ship sliced through the blackness of space, leaving the bright lights of the Galactic auction house far behind. Exlar was at the controls, his expression as stoic as ever, but I could sense the tension simmering just below the surface. We were chasing shadows now, trying to unravel a mystery that could spell the end for the Zorks, and possibly a lot more if we didn't figure it out soon. "So we know someone's put a hit on the Zorks," I said, breaking the silence. "And they're in your alliance. That narrows it down, right?" Exlar grunted in acknowledgement. Narrowing it down doesn't help much when you're dealing with alliances that span half the galaxy. The Zorks work with dozens of factions, all with their own agendas. The question isn't just who, but why. I leaned back, letting my mind wander as I stared at the stars streaking past. Why would anyone be scared of the Zorks? You're assassins, sure, but there's a lot of that going around. Exlar gave me a sidelong glance. It's not about fear, it's about control. The Zorks operate independently, outside the usual power structures. We're a wild card, and not everyone likes that, especially those who thrive on order and predictability. I thought about Dave Johnson from the DMV and his bizarre, laid-back response to danger. You mean like humans? Exlar snorted. Humans are chaotic, but not a threat in the same way. You're unpredictable, but you don't have the infrastructure or influence the Zorks do. Whoever's behind this sees the Zorks as an obstacle to their plans, and they're willing to use any means necessary to remove us. We lapsed into silence again, the weight of the unknown hanging between us. The Zorks were clearly in someone's crosshairs, and now, by association, so was I. But as much as I wanted to go home, I knew that wasn't an option, not until we figured this out. We're heading to Crelari space, Exlar announced suddenly, pulling me from my thoughts. Crelari? I asked, vaguely recalling something about them from the Galactic briefings I'd skimmed over. Aren't they weird? Exlar's lips curled into a rare, wry smile. Weird doesn't cover it. The Crelari are master negotiators, but they're also mercurial and borderline insane. If anyone knows who's pulling the strings, it's them. I nodded, though the idea of dealing with a bunch of unpredictable aliens didn't exactly fill me with confidence. Still, I was in too deep to back out now. A few hours later, we dropped out of hyperspace and approached Crelari Prime, a planet that looked like someone had taken a marble and splattered it with neon paint. Its surface was a kaleidoscope of colors, shifting and swirling in patterns that made my head spin just looking at it. Whatever you do, don't try to make sense of their architecture, Exlar warned, as we descended towards a sprawling city of impossible shapes and angles. The Crelari have a thing for non-Euclidean geometry. Great, I muttered, bracing myself as we landed in a busy docking bay. Just what I needed, an alien acid trip. Exlar chuckled darkly. Welcome to the club. We disembarked and made our way through the bustling Crelari market, a riot of sounds, smells, and sights that defied description. Vendors hawked goods that shifted in form and color as you looked at them, and the air was filled with a cacophony of alien music and chatter. Exlar led us to a towering, twisted building that seemed to shimmer like a heat mirage. We entered, and the inside was even more disorienting. Hallways that looped back on themselves, doors that led to nowhere, and rooms that seemed to change size and shape as you moved through them. This way, Exlar said, navigating the madness with the confidence of someone who'd been here before. We eventually arrived at a large chamber filled with a dizzying array of screens, each displaying data that shifted and changed too quickly to follow. At the center of the room sat a Crelari, a tall, slender being with skin that sparkled like a million tiny stars and eyes that glowed a deep, shifting purple. Exlar, the Crelari said, its voice a harmonious blend of male and female tones. You bring a human. How novel. This is Cuthara, Exlar said, introducing the Crelari with a curt nod. They handle information trades for the Crelari High Council. Cuthara tilted its head, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. A human in Zork's company. The galaxy continues to surprise. What do you seek, assassin? Exlar cut straight to the point. Someone's put a bounty on the Zorks, and I need to know who and why. Cuthara's eyes flickered, and a series of data streams flashed across the screens around us. A tall order, it mused, its voice lilting with amusement. The Zorks have many enemies, and even more false friends. But information of this nature, it comes at a high price. Exlar nodded, his expression guarded. Name it. Cuthara smiled, a chilling, otherworldly expression that made me uneasy. The Crelari have heard of human peculiarities. Your ability to defy logic and reason fascinates us. Give us a demonstration, something truly human, and we will consider your request. I blinked, caught off guard. You want a demonstration? Of what? Cuthara gestured gracefully. Surprise us. Show us why humans are considered so baffling, so unpredictable. I glanced at Exlar, who shrugged. Clearly, this was my problem to solve. I racked my brain for something that would be considered uniquely human, a concept that was both absurd and utterly normal. Then it hit me. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Ever heard of karaoke?" Exlar groaned, but Kuthara's eyes lit up with interest. "Karaoke?" "Elaborate." I spent the next few minutes explaining the bizarre human pastime of singing badly to popular songs in front of an audience, and Kuthara listened, enraptured. By the end of my pitch, the Crelari was practically vibrating with excitement. "Remarkable," Kuthara said, clapping its hands together. "A celebration of imperfection and vulnerability. Truly, the essence of unpredictability." "So, do we have a deal?" I asked, hoping my impromptu cultural lesson was enough. Kuthara nodded, and the screens around us shifted to display a new set of data. "The one who seeks the end of the Zorks is a shadow within your alliance, an entity known as the Sakar. They operate from within, using the guise of friendship to manipulate and betray. Their goal is to dismantle the Zorks, not out of fear but out of ambition. They seek to control what cannot be controlled." Exlar's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "The Sakar, of course." "You know them?" I asked, sensing a new level of tension in Exlar's demeanor. "They're an old faction," Exlar said, his voice low and dangerous. "Meddlers and manipulators, always scheming. If they've decided the Zorks are a threat, it means they're planning something big." Kuthara bowed slightly. "Our transaction is complete. May your journey be as unpredictable as your species." We left the Crelari compound, my mind spinning with the new information. The Scar were a dangerous enemy, and now we had a name, but no clear path forward. The galaxy was a vast and treacherous place, and Exlar's enemies were far from the only ones we'd have to contend with. "So, what's the plan?" I asked as we boarded Exlar's ship. Exlar's eyes glinted with a renewed sense of purpose. "We find the Scar and make them regret ever targeting the Zorks. And you," he added, his gaze shifting to me. "Keep being unpredictable. It's the one advantage we've got." I nodded, a strange mix of fear and excitement bubbling within me. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was in this for the long haul, and the galaxy was about to learn just how chaotic a human could be. As Exlar punched in the coordinates for our next jump, I couldn't help but grin. Maybe, just maybe, unpredictability was exactly what we needed to survive this wild interstellar game of cat and mouse. And if not, well, at least it was going to be one hell of a story. If you enjoy this video, then don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell.